All right, thank you for being here. So, before we begin, things we need for today's lesson is one, a Gmail account, two, a GCP account using a Gmail account, and three, a DBT cloud account. This is so for all we need. Let's just pop into GCP. I've already created an account. This one is a brand new, fresh one. I'm quickly gonna look for BigQuery. I think I might need permissions because, yep, it's a fresh one. All right, so we are here and we can see that we don't have much data over here because it's a brand new fresh one. Let's try an SQL query to make sure that everything is good. I'm gonna try querying a table that we'll be using for this lesson called Jaffel Shop Customers. Let's run that. And you can see that this preloaded table on GCP has three fields. One is ID, which is an integer, first name and last name, which are strings. Okay, there are two more tables that I want to quickly take a look at because we'll also be using these ones in this lesson. One is called orders and the other one is called payment. If we quickly run them, I think it should take a second or two. There we go. So the orders table has ID, user ID, order, date, status, and the loaded at date, but we don't really need that much because we don't care for the date at which the pipelines were loaded with data. So in this prices payment table, we got ID, order ID, payment method, status, amount, created at, also batch stat, which is not very useful to us and unimportant. So we're gonna ignore that one for now. Now, the next step is for us to connect GCP and DBT Cloud. And for that, we need to create what we call a service account. So basically give DBT permissions to reach out to our GCP. So BigQuery API is the service that we want to give access to using these credentials. Let's select application data and service account name. This could be anything for this lesson. I'm just going to keep it quite simple, but if you're using a prod environment, make sure that it's meaningful. Um, in terms of the access that we need to grant, I think we need the user permissions as well as the editor permissions. So let's quickly look for them over here. And I normally recommend doing this in the authentication wizard, so it's just quite easy. And let's click continue. Grant users access to the service account. No, this one can be left empty. Let's click done. All right, service account created. Now it's time for us to create a key. And the key will ideally should be in the form of JSON because it makes life easier when you're working with DBT. Let's download that and pop over to DBT. And this is the UI when you land. Let's click add new connection. And you can see that DBT Cloud gives you several connections out of the box. You can pick between Snowflake, BigQuery, Postgres, Redshift, Databricks, Spark, Synapse, Fabric, Athena. All these connections are, industry-wide standardized ones. So I'm going to pick BigQuery. All right. So let's upload that account JSON file. And it fills everything in very nicely, so that's very convenient. Let's save that, and I think I'll close this because we don't need it anymore. All right, so now we have the connection. Let's give our database a name so that it's more meaningful. Naming is always hard for me, so let's just go with this one. And we can test the connection to see whether the authentication tokens that we got from GCP and fed into DBT Cloud is working as expected. So far, it looks to be, let's see, there we go. Great. So when you do that, you'll be taken to this UI where you're given the choice of, setting up a repository. So it can be done via manage, which means that you can use the Cloud IDE, or you can use Git clone, GitHub, GitLab. For this lesson, I'm going to be using the Cloud IDE, but I will be creating a tutorial where we work with DBT Core in the future using Git and BigQuery. So let's give our repository a name. There we go. Maybe righto. So let's use the Cloud IDE, and there we go. It's spinning up, and we should have an empty repo soon. There we go. Great. So the first thing that we can do is we can initialize the DBT project at the click of this button. It's pretty useful. And then you can see that we have all these files that we just got set up with. We can commit it because it's the initial commit. Alrighty. And so far we are on master. I would like to change that. Let's create a feature branch. Since these are new models that we'll be adding, let's call it adding new models. Righto. There we go. So in terms of what's inside, you can see that there's a README, a project YML. We've got some tests in there, but the most important folder here is the models one, which contains some SQL files. So you can see that it contains some out-of-the-box SQL files. We don't really need them much for now because we'll be creating fresh ones of our own. So I'm just gonna delete these. Right, and it's pretty nifty. It's keeping track just like Git would, so that's very useful and nice. Let's create our new file called customer SQL and the other one called order SQL. And the code, oh yeah, so before we do that, this one is quite, the code is pretty simple. We basically, are selecting three fields. One is ID, as you see over here, and the first name and the last name. But instead of selecting everything, we would like to give them proper names using aliases, which is why we have ID as custom ID. And the order SQL file will have something similar: ID as order ID, user ID as custom ID to make readability easier, and order date and status. So if you open everything, if you select everything in this data table, you can see that it contains one unnecessary data field called ETL loaded at. So we don't really need this. We don't need the time at which the data was loaded onto the pipelines. So we're going to go with the four that we only need. And then we're going to create the next step is oh yeah, before I do that, I forgot that we can to push these files up, to push these models up, we have to use dbt build, which is like you just saw, done via the click of a button. Let's also do the build over here. Pop over to GCP to make sure that they were streamed up. And you can see that this is the name that we gave our DBT cloud data set. And there we go. We've got our data sets. So the customers has customer ID, first name, last name as expected. And if we preview them, you can see all the data flowing through. The same for orders, only the four fields that we selected. So the metadata about the time at which these data was streamed was not available. Right, so let's create something slightly longer in terms of querying. I'm just copy pasting the code over here. I'm not going to go too deep into explaining this because I assume that you would display a certain familiarity with SQL since you are learning about DBT and BigQuery. But for the sake of just making reading this easier, I'm going to quickly go through this code. So what's happening at the top is we are importing customers from STG customers, orders from orders table. This is very similar to importing that you do when you're in Python or React or JavaScript, really. And then you can see that we have customer orders. Customer orders basically is another data table. It's a CTE, really, that selects customer ID, order ID, the minimum, order date, max as the most recent date, and the order ID, but they are counted. So they are taken as the number of orders that a customer has made. And then finally, we have final CTE, which selects customers ID from customers, first name from customers, last name, and then it's going to take number of orders from customer orders and going to replace null with zero. And we do some joining to make sure that customer order data is connected with customer data, and then we basically export it all. So at the end, we will have all the data that is being that is being produced by final. Let's just build that. Let's preview it, and you should be able to see all the data that we are looking for right now. Let's pop over to GCP and see whether this got populated. All right, visit customers. Fantastic. Customer ID, first name, last name, and all the other fields that we wanted. Great. Let's preview. Good. You can see that the number of orders is zero for where the customer's number of order was now. So it's been replaced with zero, which is good. And now that we are here, I want to quickly also move into talking about what we did so far. We connected GCP and BigQuery, sorry, GCP and DBT, and modeled some data, pushed it up to GCP. And now we're going to be looking at how we can access this data using BI tools, which is Google Looker Studio, in order to show it to stakeholders what the data that we have. Okay, so let's do self-employed. No to all, but that's odd. Okay, so continue gets active later. Right, so let's create a quick dashboard over here. We can select BigQuery because that's where the data is, authorize it, righto, and the project and the data set. There we go, customers. And this should load up a table of data because this is the initial one. And this is good because now we can see that we can create graphs, pie charts, tables out of the data that we just modeled using DBT and pushed onto GCP. And all of this was done quite easily. Let's try to make this table slightly more meaningful by replacing record count with maybe the last name of the customer. I think it would also be better if we have like order count, maybe, because as a business, it gives us an indicator of how our customers are purchasing. Great. And as I said earlier, if you are looking to create more graphs and tables, you can do that. You have plenty of options over here: pie charts, bar charts, line charts, area charts. Yeah, there we go. So I want to spend a few seconds talking about what we covered so far. We tested whether the data was preloaded into BigQuery. So we made sure that we ran those initial SQL queries. And then we created a GCP account to access BigQuery using DBT. We loaded this JSON file that we got from BigQuery onto DBT and connected BigQuery and DBT. We created a DBT project using the init button, and then we created several models. We kind of went through those models, talking about what they did, etc., etc. And then we pressed the build button on those models, which streamed it up to GCP, which then allowed us to look at the data using our BI tools. And that brings me to the end of this lesson. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If there's anything in this lesson that you felt that you learned something out of, if you found it helpful, please do let me know. Leave a like, leave a comment, click on the subscribe button. Also, if you have any feedback for me, please just leave them in the comments box below. I'll make sure I get back to you individually. You can also suggest ideas for future content. If you have something that you would like to see me cover, please do let me know, and I'll make sure I action them as soon as possible. Thank you so much. I'll see you around.